up!
Get!
No!
No!
Get up!
No! Get out of here!
It's the most spooky time of the year.
Mid to late August?
No, October.
October? The month of spooky tales and frightful scenes?
Is there any other reason to awaken you?
No. But I gotta stay. I mean, place needs cleaned up. Serratus needs a walk. And, yeah, I'm just gonna stay here. In my home. That I pay for. That I totally live in year round and have been living in since the end of last season. So, get. No. Get. Read sign. Get.
Get up!
I know, it's shameful. Have you tried finding a place to live in this market, though? Really? We're in the Midwest of the United States. The nearest spooky tombs are all the way over in New Orleans. What am I gonna do? Move back to the old country? I don't think so. No.
You can't stay in a cupboard in the Midwest your entire life. You're making us late. Yurik's already there.
I thought I killed him in the end of the last season. But that means Yurik is an undead. We must handle this with extreme caution. There's nothing more sinister or scary than a spooky skeletal being of pure undead terror. Isn't that right, Serratus? Yes, whisper your truths to me, Serratus. Yes, you think we should go? Yes? Hello? He hasn't been saying anything this whole time. I've just kind of filled in the blanks. Does he talk to you?
Of course he does.
Oh my god. Greetings, young ones. It is I, once again, your host, the keeper of spooky tales, the master of frightful accounts, and the rememberer of horrible happenings. We have returned for another glorious Halloween Advent during this troubled 2020 season of spooky Halloween. Now, this is the new and improved Halloween 24-day Advent. Unlike the old improved 24 days of spooky Halloween, this spooky Advent is more of a variety show of horrifying happenings. witchyful witchcraft,
Witchyful.
murderous murders, and bad bestial bestiaries filled with beguiling beasts of big bad bewilderment.
Are you done now?
Terror, horror, history lays before us a spread of delicious dread, of tasty terror, of ghastly gastronomie,
I think that's
as they
enough.
say in France. Now, because this is the advent of our 2020 Halloween Advent, we are going to have a very special 24 days for you in honor of our British co-host, Yorick. Well, I mean, he's basically British. Get a look at these teeth.
Basically, what he meant to say during all of that is each story will be composed of 3 parts. The first, a dive into witchcraft as it actually is in the world. The second, a terrible, terrifying murder most foul. His favorite part. And third, a look at our darling little beasts in our bestiary.
Not the bestiary of beguiling, terrifying, awful, no good, dirty beasts.
Of course. What else did you expect us to do? The bestiary of cute and cuddly little monsters from around the world?
No, I expected the bestiary of horrifying, terrible, and otherwise despicable creatures of the night. But, you know, that other one will do too.
Does it really matter?
I don't know. Does it really matter? Stay tuned to find out. But first, a tale of witchcraft, or perhaps
For our first day of our Halloween spooktacular, I've decided to cover a very influential witch. Or she might not have technically been a witch, but her legend has definitely given her the title. Today I'd like to cover Mother Shipton. She was an English prophetess, I suppose would be the best word to describe her, as her prophecies are really what made her become legendary. But she wasn't always known as Mother Shipton. Her real name was Ursula Southiel. She was born in 1488 to a young lady by the name of Angela, who was about 15. She had become pregnant and wouldn't tell anyone who the father was, and was eventually shunned from her hometown. She ended up going from town to town for a little while, but eventually made her way back home and gave birth to Ursula in a little cave just outside of town. Angela eventually made her way back to her hometown of back to her hometown of Knacksborough, Yorkshire, where she gave birth to Ursula in a cave during a storm. So, plays into her witchy legend just a little bit. Eventually, the abbot of the town found out about Angela and Ursula, and he gave Ursula to a couple in the town so she could be raised properly. And Angela was shipped off to a convent. As I did my research, I couldn't really find out, there's not any information on where. There was a little side note in a couple of articles that she eventually passed at the Covenant a couple of years later, but there's not any information on how or why. So Ursula was raised by a couple whom I also couldn't find the name of. Lots of pieces of her life history are just kind of missing, especially the early years. There was an article that stated that when she went to school, she was often teased and bullied, but she was a teacher's pet, incredibly, quick-witted, knowledgeable. She picked up on information incredibly well and was a gifted child despite what they would call her deformities. Ursula had a very long hooked nose. She must have had some kind of spinal deformity. It's stated that even as a young child, in what would have been of her middle school years, she walked with a cane bent over. The next part of her life that we really have any information on is in 1512. Ursula marries a carpenter from her hometown by the name of Toby Shipton. Their marriage didn't last long. Mr. Shipton passed away after about 2 years. I also couldn't find information on what he passed from. A lot of the information of her life is just kind of poof, gone. The legend. It's noted that while she was married to Mr. Shipton, she did the occasional, prophecy, palm reading kind of thing. It's really what she becomes known for. After her husband passes away, she has to find a way to put bread on the table, essentially, and that's what she turns to. She becomes the prophetess. And over the years and years and years and years, people attribute her prophecies to different things happening in and around the world. She's attributed to having a prophecy about the Great Fire of London, of the plague. She's said to have a prophecy over the internet, over airplanes. But granted, some of these might have been written after she had passed. So when you describe her as a prophetess, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, because we're not entirely sure anymore what was actually her prophecy and what was written later when her prophecies were published. So as she grows older, she eventually becomes the oldest person in the village. She becomes known as Mother Shipton then as she grows older and outlives a lot of the people that were childhood friends and people of her own age. By that time, her mid-50s, 60s, she's become so famous. It's said that the king actually used to send messengers to her to hear some of her prophecies and bring them back to him, that she was that precise, that she would actually manage to give prophecies over things that would really happen. There are some notable instances in that fact. As Mother Shipton's fame grew, she drew the attention of Cardinal Wolsey, who was very influential at the time. And as the king began to send messengers to her and people began to whisper about her powers of prophecy, it came to his attention, and he eventually decided and eventually declared that he was going to burn her on the pyre. Mother Shipton coincidentally, well, not coincidentally, she spoke prophecy that he would never even make it step foot into Yorkshire. And sure enough, he didn't. He was jailed on account of hearsay by a lord, and eventually died in jail without even stepping foot in Yorkshire, which allowed Mother Shipton to live out her life to the ripe old age of 73, which is quite long for someone during that time period. At that point, she was really more legend than actual person. People spoke of her prophecies, whispered about them. She was known far and wide, which attributes to her legacy. She has, at one point, she had more than 200 pubs named after her. There are currently 2 still surviving. One of them even has a bronze statue in her likeness above their door. Gotta be an interesting pub. I'm not sure where it is. I'll have Walter superimpose that on the screen because I wrote it down, but I can't remember it. Thanks, babe. She was also, the cave where she was born is now called Mother Shipton's Cave. She actually lived there for a good period of her life after her marriage. She kind of drew away from society. She was an outcast for a little while. She actually lived in the cave for a little while as she was starting to become known for her prophecies. It was a free place to live while she was trying to put bread on her table. And part of the attraction of her cave, there's what is called the petrification well, which is, it draws people far and wide. People will leave modern things there and they eventually become encased in stone. One study that I read about the petrification well is that it takes on average about 3 months for a teddy bear to become petrified. Yeah, which is pretty neat. I mean, you have to have a lot of dedication to go out there and be like, oh yeah, this teddy bear was put here on this day and it's fully petrified by this day. It's a really interesting part of her life that is left over. There are tours done practically on a daily basis. It draws people from all over to that town. It's rated 4 out of 5 stars on Yelp and TripAdvisor. 4 out of 5 stars on Yelp and TripAdvisor. And people go there all the time. They spend hours there investigating the cave, leaving things to become petrified. It draws a lot of business to the town. In addition, in the town, there is a bronze statue in her likeness as well. It was put there in 2012. There was a fundraiser to raise the money to put it there. And there's also a moth named after her. It's called the Mother Shipton moth. And it's named that because it has a profile of a hag on its wings. It's a really interesting moth. I don't quite see the hag on it myself, but if you do, kudos to you. So while Mother Shipton might not have considered herself a witch, and she might not be a witch in as many terms, her legacy and her prophecies definitely lend that title to her. And I think she's a really notable person in history for managing to survive to a ripe old age of 73. And to be known to this day for her prophecies. She's a really inspiring figure for making herself independent, even in spite of what people thought of her and what would have been her difficult beginnings. And she's definitely really inspiring in that way. So, Mother Simple. Mother Shipton, a witch of Great Britain. I don't know what I was doing there. Cut that out. I'm done. I'm done. Turn it off. No more from Aaliyah.
Today, young ones, we will be covering 2 nefarious deaths taking place on the Brittain itself. One case shall take place within Victorian Scotland, and the other Victorian London. And honestly, would you have it any other way for the Great Britain special? Our first nefarious case involves unrequited love, quass, and arsenic, the 3 most Victorian things in all of existence. And without further ado, young ones, the tale of Madeline Smith. Madeleine Smith. Madeline Smith was raised within the strictures and the structures of Victorian-era Britain. As far as the structure goes, her father was a successful architect, and as far as the strictures go, her mother was the daughter of a successful architect. Little did they know that their young child might one day grow to become the architect of a nefarious murder plot. Madeline Smith attended a preparatory school for young ladies where she learned to be prim and proper and all of that pride and prejudice nonsense that haunts the dreams and nightmares of English professors and British children to this very day. Despite the intensive properness, the sophistication of young Madeline's upbringing, nothing would prepare her for a chance encounter with Emile, the anglerfish, with Pierre-Emile L'Anguille, which I'm hoping I said correctly. A French native from the Channel Isles, and the son of a seed merchant. Poor Emile was simply not within the same social class as Madeline Smith. However, that did not stop Madeline and Emile from carrying out a sort of a covert affair, ultimately meeting regularly at a mutual friend's home for mysterious happenings in the night. Madeline and Emile would even go so far as to become engaged secretly. However, all of this would change in January of 1857, when Madeline's parents decided to betroth her to a wealthy merchant instead. Now, it's worth noting that their secret engagement was still secret, but it became a double secret when Madeline kept her engagement from Emile. Instead, she wrote him and said that it was over, that a coldness had grown between them. She also requested that he return all of her letters, as it would not have been a good look if they got out to the public. However, Emile refused. Ultimately, they wound up agreeing to meet later in the month of February. Emile and Madeline began to have strange events happen around them. First off, Emil, he tried cocoa for the first time in his life during the February of this cold Scottish year. Second, Madeline Smith, she absconded mysteriously to the family's summer home on the River Clyde, which is a very, very white name for a river. Why not just call it the River Chad, the River Preston, the River Sven? Third, Emil suddenly started taking ill with frequency after his meetings with Madeline. Oh, and this all happened before Madeline absconded, and mysteriously, when she ran away to her summer home, is about the same time Emil's mysterious sickness became mysterious death by arsenic poisoning. I think the truth has become clear, dear viewers. She struck him dead with the cocoa of death. Or did she? You see, dear viewer, Madeline Smith was never charged, never hung, never penalized for the murder. I mean, aside from the scandal that befell her, she never did marry William Minnick. And I don't think she married Emil either. This was not a proper time for the practice of the necromantic arts. Nothing prim and proper about raising the dead, is there, Yorick? I thought he was right here. Madeline's innocence or guilt is actually harder to determine than one might assume. All of the evidence is kind of circumstantial. They had no proof that Emil's illnesses line up exactly with his meetings with her, because many of the letters and exchanges that they exchanged were mysteriously missing dates and times. So as a result, it was hard to pin her with anything. Add to that the very real benefit of her class and the fact that she could have a sort of a defense counsel to keep her shielded from mistrial. And it's easy to see how she might get away with all of this very murdery looking activity. It's important to know that she went on to marry again, have 2 children, divorce, and then move to America and change her name to Sheehy. 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 So I'm guessing you can see that this story might have a moral. Well, stay tuned, young ones, because this one's a 2-parter that ties in together with our next story. A tale featuring the 4th most Victorian thing of all time, young ones. And I'm not talking about top hats, or pocket watches, or steamboats. No, I'm talking about the classic maid. Elizabeth Fenning, called Eliza, was a maid in the household of Orlebar Turner and his wife, Orlebarette Turner. Then one day, out of the mysterious auspices of time, emerged a grim spectre to haunt Miss Turner for the rest of her days. Her household was visited by her in-law. Elizabeth Fenning being a dutiful maid of her time, prepared a delicious meal, including a delicious sauce and an order of dumplings, less cooked light and fluffy, and more cooked unleaded. Unleaded? They should not be leaded, just to be clear. Unleavened. Less cooked light and fluffy, and more cooked unleavened and black as sin itself. As it just so happens, a packet of arsenic had gone missing from the home office of Mr. Turner. A packet of arsenic used to oppress the vermin class of Victorian London. This packet of arsenic seems to have somehow found its way into the dumplings of Elizabeth Fenning. Perhaps fortuitously, none of the Turner household died of their arsenic illness. However, the same couldn't be said for Elizabeth Fenning. Oh no, she survived the poisoning attempt. But what she did not survive was the court of law. The seeds of the Tyburn tree had already been planted in her orchard. It's important to note that the evidence against Elizabeth Fenning is actually quite circumstantial, as there's no reason to believe she mixed the arsenic into the ingredients for the dumplings. It could have been mixed into the yeast or the flour or replaced the yeast, and no one would have been wiser. It could have been some kind of happy accident. Well, a happy accident for death, I suppose. Elizabeth Fenning went to the gallows for her crimes, hung between two despicable men. This story has a moral, my young ones. Here we have two cases, Madeline Smith and Elizabeth Fenning, both highly circumstantial cases indeed. But while privilege protected Madeline Smith from the hangman's noose, there was no such benefit present at the trial and execution of Elizabeth Fenning. My dear young ones, perhaps the deadliest killer this whole time wasn't an unrequited lover, or a jealous maid, or even those lead-lined hats people were wearing for some reason. Perhaps the real killer here is the bias of a criminal justice system, with class kept at the forefront of its mind. Or perhaps it was Killer Coco, the ultimate tool for death, mayhem, and destruction. It's a bestiary, everybody come see some bees. 4-part British edition. The red cap of the border country. The British dwelling red cap of old. This creature finds its roots in Dutch folklore. A race of harmless gnomes more akin to brownies than to the terrifying ghouls which frequently stalk the British nightscape. However, much like William of Orange, when he crossed to conquer England, when the legend of the Red Cap crossed over into the border country between Scotland and Britain, it ceased to be as much a collection of helpful gnomes living in mushroom villages and became more of a demon goblin from hell, thirsting for blood, wearing armor, wielding a pike staff, a red cap, and a great bushy beard of magnificent form. He stalks the lands between Brittain and the other half of Britain, seeking victims to poke with his terrible pike staff. But it is said you can use the good book itself, hallelujah, to cast him out, in which case he will burst into flames, never to return until he does, which is a huge problem if you live in the border country, because he always returns to the border country. The Wolver of Shetland.
Off the coast of Scotland, there is a chain of small islands known as the Shetland Isles. There lives a creature of a particularly interesting nature, the Wolver. He stands about the height of a human, with a humanoid body covered in light brown fur and the head of a wolf. Just an entire wolf's head on a furry human's body. He's odd looking. He doesn't wear clothes. Wolf's head, humanoid body. He has his own stone in the middle of a river from which he fishes day in and day out, living a quiet life, an easy life, the life that we all wish we could live. He's a generally kind creature, often going into the nearest town and leaving fish for the poor folk who may not be able to afford food that day, or for grieving families to show his support. So long as you don't harm the Wolver or bear him any ill intentions, he is happy to show you your way in the dark forests when you are lost at night, choosing to be a kind, helpful creature day to day than persecute you as many of his werewolf cousins might do. The forest, which surely abound on the Shetland Islands. His small, shallow cave, dug out year after year, where he hides away from society, enjoying his freshly caught fish and his warm, sunny spot on his stone in the river. He's a good neighbor. While he may not be the most terrifying of creatures, it is good to know that there are still some kind hearts in this world, no matter how different they are. This solitary creature may not be as terrifying as many of the other beasts in our bestiary, more of a beguiler, but it is important to cherish the Wolver and his kind soul in our Halloween hearts and our rotted autumnal souls.
The Afank of Wales. The Afank, a creature of ancient Arthurian legend, crawled from the depths of the murkiest lakes and rivers. Picture this. It is a picturesque, beautiful summer day, in the Welsh hills. You swim in an isolated, remote lake, far from the corrupting influence of technology. Hospitals, police, cell phones, cars, all delightfully far from your mind. You swim tranquilly over the murky waters, and then it comes for you, rising from the murky depths, one part disturbed beaver, one part adorable crocodile, and another part terrifying dwarf. It crawls from the waters. It munches and crunches on your tender bones, far from where any Welshman can hear your screams. You're never seen again, thought to be another victim of the mysteries of the Welsh hills, vanished into the night, gobbled up. I mean, unless you buy that at some point in time some Arthurian figure of legend, of which nobody can really agree on which one, attached a chain to the Afank and then dragged him out of the water and then killed him, because apparently things that live in the water lose their power out of the water. But nah, that's bullshit. It's waiting to eat your bones. The Banshee of Ireland.
Ireland is a place of many stories, of creatures high and low. Ireland is a place that has many, many tales of strange folk and creatures roaming its lands. Banshees, women spirits who go from town to town, predicting the deaths of innocent folk, and perhaps causing the deaths of plenty of other innocent folk. Their wails can be heard from miles, and God forbid you spy one of them wailing, veiled under a tree, as you're certain to meet your doom far sooner than if you had just heard her cries. The banshee may take the form of an old crone with long white hair and a hooked nose, or the form of a young maid with red hair shining like blood and a gray cloak. No matter whom you see underneath that tree on the edge of town, be sure to tell your family that you love them. You are not to last much longer after that. The end.
Well, young ones, I hope you enjoyed our glorious Halloween Advent. A night of spooks and frights of a uniquely British theme. I know young Yorick certainly did. Join us tomorrow when we shall resume our autumnal festivities together. We shall have indeed another night of glorious tales.
Tales of witches.
Tales of murder.
And of beasts.
Bestial beasts. Until next time, check out our Patreon and subscribe, comment, leave a dislike. Do it for her. For her. A dislike for her.
I think you mean a dislike for you.
Do it for her. For her. Do it for her. For her. That's where it'll end.
It's clicked.